Many years ago, in the days when the radio was still the main form of communication, the following was broadcast from a Tennessee country preacher. In his own words, he said, "Friends, the work of the devil is being carried on under many guises, right under our very noses. I was walking down the streets of one of our great cities, and I came upon this establishment, the Museum of Natural History. There was a sign out in front of this edifice that said, 'Come, see and hear about dinosaurs.' I was curious about what went on in such places, so I walked in there, and there was this man, a tool of the devil, preaching about monstrous creatures to all these unsuspecting children from a school. He was holding in his hand and reading from a book called Prehistoric Animals. Now, nothing prehistoric could possibly be Christian. So I snatched the book from his hand. I was totally upset in these perilous times when the Antichrist in our government says, 'No, you children can't have prayers in school, but you can have dinosaur religion taught every day.' And here, in this unholy temple of dinosaurs, children are being preached to from false Bibles and taught to worship idols that never existed. And in their minds, belief in these creatures is taking the place of the knowledge of God and God's Word. So I cast the book down the steps and stomped on it. And I tried then and there to plan how I might mount a crusade against this new devil religion of dinosaur belief. Dinosaurs are the work of the devil. They are the devil's plaything. Such godless communist dinosaur information must be destroyed before it carries us all to perdition." As crudely phrased as this might have sounded, the preacher highlighted a major truth that's worth scrutinizing, namely that dinosaurs have become a sort of religion by modern so-called scientists. What's more, the entire concept of dinosaurs as they've been presented to us in mainstream paleontology is largely speculative and unsupported by the scanty evidence we currently possess. That's not to say that large reptilian creatures of a sort didn't exist in the distant past, but the size, magnitude, and appearance of these creatures, as they've been presented to us, is entirely conjectural, and it's highly unlikely that such ungainly animals, such as the Tyrannosaurus rex or the elongated Brachiosaurus, ever existed, at least not in the way they're presented to us. Consider, for instance, the brief history of fossil discovery. Robert Plot, in 1677, was credited for being the first one to find an alleged dinosaur bone, which he thought belonged to a giant human. The first supposed dinosaur fragments were discovered by fossil hunter William Buckland in 1819. Note that fossil discoveries were entirely made in the modern era, when the false religion of scientism was beginning to gain a foothold in shaping modern scientific thought. Which prompts the question, how unlikely is it that evidence of dinosaurs, if they ever truly existed, were never discovered in any of the thousands of years which preceded the modern era? Further, it's commonly assumed that when fossil hunters stumble upon a discovery, the fossils are of a complete or nearly complete dinosaur skeletons. But in fact, most fossil fields span several acres, and the bones are mostly fragmentary and incomplete. Think of it as a huge field containing tiny bits and pieces of a long ago destroyed jigsaw puzzle. Trying to fit those fragmentary and incomplete pieces together into a coherent whole is, for all intents and purposes, an exercise in futility. More importantly, consider that of all extant dinosaur skeletons, and I'm talking about the ones commonly displayed in museums, not more than 20% of the bones in those skeletons are legitimate. That's according to Bing AI. The other 80% or more of those fossilized bones are fabricated. So when you see what is advertised as a dinosaur relic in a museum, what you're typically seeing is the result of the overactive imaginations of researchers who have no idea or conception what those bones actually represented. Even more speculative is how dinosaurs are portrayed in mainstream media, which represents nothing more than an artist's conception of how they imagine these creatures might have looked. This begs the question, how is it possible that scientists can spin an entire narrative, which is accepted by fact as most people, based on only 20% or less of the bones and bone fragments they typically discover at a fossil site? Is this not the very epitome of letting one's imagination run wild? The problem, of course, is that the paleontological community is largely guided by an atheistic, anti-Christian bias, and as such, their tendency is to see in bone fragments things that likely never existed, but which can be artificially constructed in such a way as to undermine biblical truth. Perhaps the best way to summarize the paleontological community is to call to mind the condemnation of these modern-day false prophets made by the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy 6:20, when he counseled us to avoid the, quote, profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called, end quote. And again in Romans 1 when he wrote, quote, professing themselves wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts and creeping things. The four-footed beasts and creeping things he referenced can undoubtedly be applied to the pseudo-scientific religion of dinosaurs in the modern age. This is South Bay. Thanks for listening.